Welcome to the Lectric Service Center. Today, we'll be showing you how to remove and install the pedals on your Lectric e-bike. Lectric e-bikes currently have two different types of pedals, folding pedals and quick release pedals. Today, we'll be going through the removal and installation of both types of pedals. A quick note, if you have an XP trike, the pedals do not fold, but the process for installation and removal is exactly the same as the foldable pedals. The main difference, other than the fact that they don't fold, is the shape of the spindle. Before we begin, you'll need to make sure you have some tools ready to go. You will need a large torque wrench and some grease. Today, we'll be using Park Tools Poly-Lube grease. You'll also need an 8mm hex wrench, an 8mm hex socket, a pedal wrench, and a 15mm crow's foot. Let's start with the foldable pedals. First, you'll need to remove the pedals from the cranks. An important note about the non-drive side pedal, or the pedal that is on the side of the bike without a chain, is that this pedal will be opposite of righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. You will be turning the pedal wrench clockwise. After a few turns, you should be able to continue unscrewing and removing the pedal by hand. Remove the pedal completely. Let's take a look at the pedals you'll be installing. On the inside of the spindle, you'll see an R and an L stamped on the spindle. The R signifies that the pedal should be installed on the drive side of the bike, or the side of the bike that has a chain on it. And on the opposite pedal, there's an L stamped into the spindle. The L signifies that the pedal is to be installed on the left side of the bike, or the side of the bike that does not have the chain. Before you install the new pedal into the crank, it is important to grease the spindle. The grease will help with the pedal not getting stuck in the crank if you ever need to remove the pedal later on. Just a small dab of grease should do the trick. Now, down at the crank, insert the spindle into the crank and begin to tighten it by turning it counterclockwise. Once you can no longer tighten it by hand, grab your pedal wrench and give it a few more turns. Make sure not to tighten it too tight, as you'll want to torque it down to spec. Using a torque wrench and a 15mm crow's foot, torque the pedal down to 40 Nm. Now we will be moving on to the other side of the bike. Again, you'll need to loosen and remove the drive side pedal. Unlike the non-drive side, you'll be loosening this pedal by turning the pedal wrench counterclockwise. Loosen the pedal all the way and remove it. Make sure the spindle has an L stamped into it. Again, add a dab of grease on the new pedal spindle, then insert it into the crank. To tighten the pedal, turn the pedal clockwise until you can no longer tighten it by hand. Then, use a pedal wrench to tighten it a few more turns. Then grab a torque wrench and a 15mm crow's foot and torque the pedal down to 40 Nm. Now we will show you how to remove and install the quick release pedals. Quick release pedals are a two-part system, the pedal itself and its quick release collar. In order to remove the pedal, pull the quick release collar outward, then pull the pedal out of the collar. Now, if you are replacing the pedal system, you'll need to remove the collar lock from the crank. To remove the collar lock, you'll need to insert an 8mm hex wrench into the collar through the back of the crank. The rotation of the collar can be tricky. When looking at the front of the crank on the non-drive side, you'll need to turn the 8mm hex wrench counterclockwise, and if you are looking at the back of the crank, you'll need to turn the wrench clockwise. If you are having to use a lot of force to loosen the collar lock, there's a chance you are turning the wrench the wrong way. Unscrew and remove the collar lock fully from the crank. The collar locks either have an R or an L etched onto them. The collar lock with the L on it will be installed on the non-drive side, or the side of the bike that does not have the chain. And the collar lock with the R on it will be installed on the drive side of the bike, or the side of the bike with the chain on it. Before you install the new collar lock into the crank, it is important to grease the threads of the collar lock. The grease will help with the collar lock not getting stuck in the crank if you ever need to remove it in the future. Just a small dab of grease should do the trick. Now, down at the crank, you will install the pedal and collar lock labeled L onto the non-drive side. Place the collar lock into the crank and start to tighten it through the back side with an 8mm hex wrench. If you are looking at the front side of the crank, you will be tightening the collar lock by turning the hex wrench counterclockwise, and if you are looking at the back side of the crank, you will be turning the wrench clockwise. Don't tighten it all the way down, as you will want to torque the collar lock to spec. Using a torque wrench and an 8mm hex socket, torque the collar lock down to 40 Nm. Now, to install the pedal into the collar lock, first make sure that the pedal has an L stamped into it. Then, insert the spindle into the collar lock. Pull out the collar lock, apply inward pressure to the pedal, then let go of the collar lock. This will lock the pedal into place. If the pedal is not going in right away, the spindle might not be aligned with the collar lock. If that is the case, pull the pedal out and try again. Now, on the other side of the bike, you will be replacing the pedal and collar lock on the drive side. Down at the crank, insert an 8mm hex wrench through the back side of the crank and loosen the collar lock. When looking at the front of the crank, you'll be turning the 8mm hex wrench counterclockwise. And if you are looking at the back of the crank, you'll be turning the hex wrench clockwise. Now, on the new collar lock, apply some grease. Then, back down at the crank, place the collar lock into the crank and insert your 8mm hex wrench through the back side. To tighten the collar lock, when looking at the front of the crank, turn the 8mm hex wrench clockwise. And if you are looking at the back of the crank, turn the hex wrench counterclockwise. Once you have the collar lock screwed in, use a torque wrench and an 8mm hex socket to torque the collar lock down to 40 Nm. Now, to install the pedal, first make sure that the pedal has an R stamped into it. Insert the spindle into the collar lock. Pull the collar lock outwards while applying inward pressure to the pedal, then let go of the collar lock. If you have any questions about either style of pedal, please feel free to contact our customer support team at contact@lectricebikes.com or give us a call at 602-715-0907. Thanks for watching.